Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome from Esri. We have folks on the line from Esri from all across the United States. My name is Mike King, and I manage our global emergency call-taking industry, and as well as our FirstNet relationship. And we are just very pleased that you took time to join us. We have folks joining from all over the world, and it looks like they're continuing to stream in. We just concluded our national security conference and our international user conference in San Diego. This year we had more than 18,000 GIS users from around the world who came together. So I really appreciate the Esri folks, because this is generally a week off for many Esri folks. So thanks to each of you. I'm joined today by my colleague Britt Bromley, who oversees our partner relationships within the emergency call-taking industry, and we'll hear from Britt throughout the webinar today. And I also want to thank Ray Umali, who is managing the logistics of the webinar. Our agenda today is going to follow what you should be seeing on the screen here momentarily, and we'll follow that rather closely. I'm going to do a quick introduction of some of our focus for 2018 and into 2019 for the call-taking industry. That will be very short in duration, and then we're going to have our focus, which is learning and leveraging insights for ArcGIS. Throughout the webinar, Britt will weigh in with questions that you ask through the chat window, so please take advantage of that chat room window. We may not get to all those questions, but we will certainly follow up at the conclusion of the webinar with not only some resource material, but answers to those questions individually. As we look at what Esri's focus is for the call-taking industry, we really have not changed a whole lot. We still recognize that address database management is the foundation to your success. And without dispatchable addresses, much of what you do day in and day out would become extremely difficult, if not impossible. We encourage you to take advantage of the capabilities that we have for best practices in address database management. We're really excited about Nina's release of the GIS document finally, and we are evaluating how Esri geocoders and our local government information model can be improved to complement this standard, which frankly is built upon international recommendations. One thing that is new as a focus for us is we're really focusing on converting two-dimensional data to 3D. And because we all live in this three-dimensional world, we encourage you to take advantage of Esri's 3D tools and the capabilities of our partners. We encourage you to look closely at your existing policy and develop new policy to help you migrate toward 3D compliance, because this is going to be critical for things like the FCC ruling on location accuracy and indoor routing and many other challenges that you will face as more and more next generation capability comes to us through the Internet of Things and all of the sensor data that's available. Today's meeting will focus on real-time analytics, and we continue to work in many different ways with this, but I think you're going to find today to be quite motivating and hopefully empowering. And then finally, we continue to focus on web applications and mobile applications for the PSAP and first responders. I just loved the quote we heard during the recent user conference when the Alabama Fusion Center directors, when asked about Esri mobile applications on the FirstNet network, simply replied, "It just works." In fact, for those of you who are evaluating how your PSAP will interact with FirstNet, I just would like to let you know that we have now proven in operational situations on the FirstNet network that the Esri applications work, and we're really thrilled, and we continue to work with them on providing developer tools and our web applications for those that are taking advantage of the FirstNet network. Well, now let me introduce our topic for today, insights for ArcGIS. I have to call out and thank Tina Matthew, the Center Director for Weber 911, and the Ogden City, Utah GIS Manager Josh Jones for their help in obtaining some 911 data from last year, as well as some localized data that's being used in this webinar. Once I received the data from them, I turned to Esri's Chief Technology Officer for Location Analytics, Mr. Haddad, and his colleague, Dr. Linda Beale, who is the Spatial Data Scientist here at Esri. Linda has more than 20 years of experience in data science and GIS, so she comes to us with a long history of looking at big analytic data. She has numerous published papers, book chapters, and is presented all around the world. We purposely chose not to share much about the 911 industry with Dr. Beale, simply asking her to share insights based on the data that she looked at. So take that into consideration today as we go through this, and then think about the ways in which you could exploit the data that you collect in your PSAPs day in and day out, not only for managing of the call volumes that you deal with, but maybe predicting where your needs will be in the future, including personnel needs. So I'm excited to join you in watching this informative session, and we turn the time over to Dr. Beale.
Great, thanks very much. So first of all, to give you a very brief introduction into Insights, just to sort of level set everyone. So the idea is that it should allow you to sort of interact with your data. So it's very intuitive. What we claim to do and what we hope we do is that we make powerful analysis very, very simple to do. We ensure that you can work with both spatial and non-spatial data in one place. Of course, we're Esri, so we realize the importance of spatial, but sometimes some questions are not spatial, or even they add context to other data that you have. So it's important that you have one place that you can answer all of your questions. So it's really one place where we allow you to do sort of self-service analysis. You can keep asking questions of that data, and we hope that you can explore and indeed get insights from the data that you have. So it is very much about analysis. Through doing the analysis, you will be able to pull out pieces of information. There are multiple different types of analysis that we can do. So obviously, before you start any analysis, there's some type of data preparation that you will need to do. Now, that could be very simple things like calculating fields. So we do allow you to just bring in your data as it is, and I'll talk through a little bit about that in a minute when I actually jump into doing a demonstration. We allow you to geo-enable, so make all the data that you have spatial wherever possible, so that if there are spatial questions you can ask of that, it's easy to do. We try to ensure that all of the results that you have from your analysis are viewed visually, so you can easily pick out patterns of that. We also make sure that we have statistics reported on everything. So it's not just what you perceive to be happening, but you can actually validate exactly what you're seeing on each of the cards, which is where we display all that information. We've also ensured that we do descriptive analysis of every single thing you do, but we're also starting to introduce more advanced analysis, such as link analysis and regression, both to explore your variables and also to predict to different locations. So we can ask many different questions of your data, and I'll show you how we can expose all of those questions and answer them. And importantly, we allow you to actually record everything that you're doing, and you can also rerun all of that analysis that you do, again, with different data sets, different times, whatever it is of interest. And of course, as part of that, you're documenting everything you do. All your analysis that you do, all the questions that you're able to answer are no use if you can't share that with other people. So we've recently spent a lot of time ensuring that you're able to share the results exactly as you want to. So there's a lot of control over how you can share that with other executives or with other people that you're working with to understand everything you've actually done as part of your analysis. So let me stop talking about that and actually show you how we do some analysis in Insights. So here we are in Insights. I'll just make it full screen so you can see it. We work within things called workbooks. So I'm actually going to open up a new workbook that I already have. And when we open up the workbook, you'll see that we can bring in multiple different data sets to work against. Now, obviously, you can't do any analysis without data, so it's important to us that we've allowed you to connect to all sorts of different data types. So obviously, spatial data, we work within a web framework, so we're connected to the portal. Now, that can be on enterprise, so it could be on your own premises, or it could be in online, depending on how you want to share the data. So it will automatically pick up all of the layers, and you see I have a number of different spatial layers there. We allow you to work within groups, so if you have specific groups you want to work with and just share the data amongst them. You may have more data sets that you want to share more widely within the organization, so such as boundary data, districts that you won't want to work within. We also connect into the Living Atlas, so there's a number of different data sets that we make freely available from Esri. We also give you access to boundaries, so we have in here all the different census boundaries, and that's just for ease of analysis so that you can quickly go in there and aggregate things up or view things by each of the different boundaries. Obviously, Excel or CSV, we're often working with that type of data set, so you can just drag and drop those data sets in and just get working with that. And importantly, we also allow you to connect directly into databases. So if your organization has a SQL Server database, SAP HANA or Oracle, we can allow you to set up a connection to that so you have your own secure connections into those databases, and then you can work directly against that data. So no need to copy out data for the GIS team to work on things. You can be working directly against that data sat within that database. So I've already brought in, so this is an Excel sheet that I just brought in. So this is for 991 calls related to law calls. And you'll see something slightly different if I actually just click on this layer name. If you're used to working with GIS, you'll see this is slightly different because within the data pane, we actually expose all of the attributes, all of the fields of information that you can work against. And also when we bring in the data set, we also do some semantic modeling. So what that allows us to do is expose both the field name and the type of the data set. So immediately as the analyst, you have information as to what is contained within that data. And also it allows us to guide you through using that data as part of your analysis. So you'll see that we have things like the shape field, so the location data. We have whether it's categorical variables, time data, or even if there's numeric variables, we expose those too. So you'll see if I drag something like when the call occurred, that it allows me to create a time series because it already knows it's temporal data. So now I can create that timeline. So now we see that pattern over time, but we also break down that data set, that timeline, into all of the different date components. So that allows you to answer more questions, such as whether there are patterns occurring by month. So we don't ask you to have to go away and calculate that. That's one additional thing. So in this data set, I only have one date field, but I'm also given all of these attributes so that you can work directly with each one of those. So we can also break down any of these charts into other variables. Very often we see that there's multiple variables we want to see within that. So if I want to see the number of calls by priority, you can see that I can just break that down just by simply selecting on the legend, and now I can see all of those patterns. So we might want to explore this data. I've looked at it by the pattern over the whole year's worth of data, the different patterns by month, but I could also take two different variables. So if I take the month and the hour, you'll see that I'm able to break this down. I'm given a number of different options that I can create. I can create maps, charts, and tables. And within the charts, I have a number of different types of charts that I can create. So I'm just going to create a heat chart here. So this has now aggregated my data behind the scenes. So this is doing analysis as I'm dragging those two variables of hour and month to aggregate up the number of events that have occurred by hour of day and by each of the month. So this is over the whole year. It's simply aggregated that data, and now I can start to see temporal patterns within that data set. So we can also have a look at the types of call that we've got. So I'm going to drag across the nature of those calls, and I'm going to create a bubble chart in this case. There's a large number of different nature of calls. So this type of chart allows me to see all of those different categories. Now I'm actually going to put on something called cross-filtering. So this is going to enable me to interact with all of these charts and actually filter out the data to whatever I'm selecting on this chart itself. So if I want to have a look at when, for example, burglar alarm calls were occurred, you'll see that now all of those other charts have updated. So now we're seeing the timeline, we're seeing the months in which those have occurred, and already we see that 1 month jumps out. And we're also seeing the times of day across those months when they occur more often. All of these visualizations that we create, we can change to any other type. So I could, for example, change this to a data clock. So if I want to see the times around a clock, perhaps that's a little easier for me to understand. And now again, I can start to have a look at those different patterns across the different types of day. And we'll see that there are indeed very different times of day when these are occurring. So events with pedestrians are happening in the middle of the night. And then if we take something like the burglar alarms, you'll see that that, of course, is occurring scattered throughout the day. So this will enable you to understand when each of these calls are occurring and maybe knowing how to better respond or who should be available to actually go out to those calls. So remember I said that this was an Excel data set that I just uploaded. So what I could do, and I've not worked with any spatial data yet, even though we have done some analysis, what you can do is enable that location, and you'll see there's the X and Y coordinate. You can actually run that, and that will then give you the spatial column that will allow me to then start to map this data and do some spatial analysis on it. So I can just drag the variable of coordinates, and you'll see now I'm able to map that data. And immediately something comes out and that we see that we have some points that have been miscategorized as to where they actually are. So it not only helps us do our analysis, but also we can see where there are issues within the data that we may want to spend a little time trying to tidy up, or at least understand that when we're making observations with the data that we have. So now we see all the points of those where the events have occurred, and there seems to be quite a lot on that map. And you'll see as I flip over, so I can turn the back of these cards over at any stage, this is where we report the statistics. So you see I'm working with over 229,000 events. So what I can do, rather than all of those locations overlapping each other, I could change the type of map that I'm looking at so that it's automatically aggregating that data up into different size bins. So I can change the resolution so we can see a little bit more of the pattern by increasing the resolution of that. You'll see that then updated. Let me zoom in a bit so we can see the pattern. This value here is when you want to switch back into the individual points, because obviously as I zoom into this map, it will make sense that at one level it will actually separate out and we can see those individual points when there's no need to aggregate them anymore. So you'll see as I zoom in, we eventually get to those points. But as I zoom out, we are able to see that spatial pattern. So we're able to see maybe some locations that stand out that we might not expect, or at least know those areas where we're seeing higher patterns of calls coming in. So we can also start to do some more advanced spatial analysis, and maybe I could select out just those calls that have come in within the police districts of Ogden. So I'm going to go back into adding in some data, and I'm going to do a quick search for a data set that I have there. And you'll see here I've got the police districts, and I'm going to add those in. And now I can map that data. So now I have those boundaries. And what I could do with this is I could maybe just select out those areas, and it really is as simple as just dragging this data set across. And you'll see as I drag it across, it's giving me the option to add a second layer to the map, filter, or even aggregate. So I'm going to filter out to those areas so that now I'm just selecting all of those locations that sit within my police district. So now you'll see I just dragged that layer, and that's now selected those areas within the police district. I can also do something like an aggregation. So I could drag across, and you'll see this time I'm going to select spatial aggregation. And now I want to see the total number of calls that have come in based on each one of those police districts. So we're doing some fairly advanced analysis here, but it's, for me as the user, as simple as just dragging those variables across, and then it's just doing that aggregation for me. So now I could start to analyze the data that we've created here. So if we just jump back to looking at this data pane, you'll see that for each one of these visualizations I've created, each one of these cards, we're actually giving you the data set itself. Because in each one of these, we're actually changing how your data is. So we're aggregating that data by the two sets of times here, by two variables. Here, we're aggregating it by the nature of the call. So this is giving us a very different view of that data. So you'll see here, we have the sum of the number of calls by nature. So we give you that data set so that you can actually then further analyze that data set here within this workbook. Or of course, you can then share that data out, and you can share that back to the portal, and then you can use that in other analysis, or other people at your organization can use that data. So you'll see if I take this filtered data set that we have all of those different variables, or the spatial aggregation one, so when I put it in by district, so now I can just see that on the table, and I can quickly see the number of calls that have been made to each one of those districts. And of course, remember, everything is completely interactive, so I can select out between all of these where everything is occurring, and we have all of that functionality available to us at all times. So that's just starting to explore it. I showed you how we could do some analysis by dragging and dropping the variables from one card to another, but we also have available to us on each of these cards something called the action button. That allows us to get in, and you'll see we have a number of different both spatial analysis that we can run here. So we can enrich the data, we can bring in more variables, we can look at density, we can do drive times, aggregation, but also if I click on this tab here, you'll see how some of those questions I mentioned on the first slide, we can actually start to answer. So how is my data distributed? So here we give you a number of different things that you can do with your data that will help you understand that distribution. Some of them are spatial, some of them are not. So you'll see, we're suggesting that creating a box plot will allow you to see the distribution, the spread of the variables within your data set. Or of course, you could classify that data. So you'll see that for all of these different things, you can do percentage change or looking at time series. Each one of these is giving you a suggestion as to how you could actually analyze this. So for those of you who aren't doing analysis as your everyday job, there's a little reminder there that will guide you along your way to actually pulling out answers from the data itself. So let me step on to a second page here. And you'll see that what I've done here is pretty similar. I've just dragged a number of variables across. So whether there was paperwork involved, yes or no. And this is again when the calls have occurred. I've already filtered this data to the first quarter of the year and just to Ogden City, because what I want to do is actually go into doing some link analysis. So I'm going to take the different units, and I'm going to take the nature of the call, and I'm going to drag this across and create a link chart. So what this is going to allow us to do is explore the relationships within my data. So explore the relationship between what the nature of the call was and the unit that actually responded. Now at the moment it's a little bit of a hairball of information. Each one of these nodes is actually sized, so analysis has gone behind the scenes and it's actually calculated the degree of how important that node is. So how many different connections are going in and out. Each one of those nodes is calculated a number of different ways, so you can change that as to whether it's the number of connections between them, whether it's the number of connections coming into them, or a combination of those things. We can also do all of this type of link analysis on a map, so we can do it both spatially and non-spatially. So you can imagine if you want to explore the flow, so how people are traveling from one area to another, how many times they're having to, then we can display all of that information on a map simply by dragging two variables across. But let's explore this link chart a little bit more and see if we can pull out some information from it. So again, I've enabled that cross filtering. So now it will react as I click through this. So let's have a look at midday in March, what's occurred. And now we can see, and remember this is aggregating it over the first quarter, which of those units have responded to which type of call that they were asked to. And you'll see as we step through the hours of the day, we are seeing very different patterns. So there's definitely different patterns, different responses that are occurring. If I jump out to something like 6 p.m., you'll see a very different pattern. And again, if I go to later in the evening, you'll see a completely different pattern. So you'll see that you can start to, if we had a little bit more time, explore each of those different relationships and understand how responses are being made by each of the units. Are there particular units that are responding to certain types of call? Are there certain types of day when you're having a particular call for that kind of things? So talking of response times, I also took when the call, yeah, sure. Hi.
Can I interrupt and ask a couple of questions? That might be a good time.
Of course you can.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think this would be a good time to, I had a couple questions here. One was, how often is the graph refreshed to reflect the change in the database?
Okay, that's a great question. So it depends what type of data set you're actually working against. So imagine if you're connected to a database or you're connecting to a feature service, then they are both live data in the sense that we are able to connect to that data. So every time you actually interact with the data, so every time I'm doing something like clicking, that's an interaction with the data. That is then going back to the original data, refreshing it and pulling the new data set across. The one time when we're unable to have that live connection is if you're using Excel data, because we actually have to copy that data set across into our server, and therefore we lose that connection to the live data set. So an Excel one isn't updated, but everything else is updated. We can also go in and update a data set itself. So you can refresh that data set, and again, that will make a call. And it also makes a call to all of the downstream analysis. So everything on that page that's connected to that data set will then be refreshed. So we can work relatively live as long as you're interacting with your workbook.
Great, thank you. And one other question, and I'll let you get back into it, the demonstration, but how does Insight handle null or invalid values?
That's another good question. So yes, we are very aware that nulls and zeros and things like that are very different. So we treat nulls as nulls. You won't see them, we remove them. If they're zeros, we treat it as a value. So we will include that. And that's a good point for anyone doing analysis. Your zeros will count towards your averages and your statistics. Your nulls will not. So I believe we're handling nulls in the correct way.
Great. All right. Thank you. I'll let you continue. Thank you for that.
All right. No problem. So I was talking about response times, and let me just click to another tab, because what I've actually done in here is I've gone in and I've done a little bit of calculation. So in the dataset options, you'll see that you can actually view the data table. So this is a little bit different to that table that you see when I drag this across. And this is going to just summarize up the number of events by each one of the nature of calls. So in here, if I go into the data table, this is actually looking at all of your data that's sitting within here. So your Excel table, and you'll see that all of those fields of information have come across. Now in here, we can do calculations on this data. We also have all of those date components broken out. If you remember, we do that automatically. And let me click on this field here. You'll see that I've done some calculations in here that's finding the difference between when they were dispatched and when they actually arrived, and right at the start here, when the call was received, and then when they actually arrived on the scene. So there's a lot of different analysis. If you really understand your data. So going back to what Mike was saying, this was all new to me, but I was able to have a look at the differences in the response times here. So makes complete sense to me that the ones that are given the highest priority, they have a much faster response time. The ones that have a lower priority are obviously taking longer to respond to. Much the same pattern that we're seeing in terms of when the call was received and then whether it was queued or not, although there is a significant difference here that I see between priority ones and maybe the 2s and 3s. So that shows me that it's very important between those different priorities that are given. Showing the use of a box plot here. So again, this is replicating the data we're seeing here, but what we see is that full distribution. So here it's the average, and here we're actually able to pull out what are statistical outliers within that data. And of course, remember, we have all of that interactivity. So if I'm looking at this on a map, you'll see that I'm able to select out where all of these outliers are. So we can further explore that data. So now that's pulling out those different outliers we have within that data. And I can now, having selected that, drag and drop those to a new map. And that's now selected out what are my outliers within that data. So my priority 3 outliers. So you see how we're doing some fairly advanced analysis, but we're making it as easy as it can be, because we all have jobs that are hard enough without us making it harder for you. So all of these different calculations you can do to explore the differences in those arrivals. And the last main thing that I want to show you here is how we actually record all of the analysis as we go through it. So let me just change here. If I'm up in the top right-hand corner, you'll see we've been working on the page view. I'm going to change that to what we call the analysis view. And you'll see as I change that, we're now looking at what is a model that was created of everything that we've done. So if I change that back to the first page, which you know I started from scratch, I had nothing on there, you'll see that this has created exactly that model. And it's now showing you what may have been slightly black box when we were working, that it's aggregated that data, that it's created those timelines, it's aggregated by the nature of the calls. So now we're seeing exactly what's been going on behind the scenes in terms of the analysis. We've also got that documentation. If anybody says, what was it you did? We can immediately see exactly what was aggregated. It gives me all of the details. If I've created a filter on there, it will tell me what I filtered. And also importantly, we can share that out. So I can share that model. I could then rerun my analysis using that model with a different data set, with a different timeline, or whatever it is I'm interested in. So let's just do that. I've got some data for fire as well. So I'm just going to bring that data in so you can see it from the very start. Add in my Excel table. So just drag that across. So you'll see that that's bringing in my data set of fire. I'm also going to add in where I have my fire stations. So I'm going to add in that spatial data. So this is just Excel data. You'll see that there's nothing spatial within this data set at all. And now I'm going to bring in a model, which you see is very similar to just bringing in the data. So I'm going to bring that model, and I'm going to flip back to that analysis view. And you'll see in here, I can update that data to be that fire stations data I just brought in. I can bring in my table of data, and you'll see now that started to run that analysis. It also allows me to, just by updating that data set, you'll see everything downstream is being run. I didn't need to press run or go or anything. So I'm going to flip back to this data set. You'll see it's now filling up each of these cards. And I'm just going to zoom into this area. And now you'll see a lot of analysis is just being run. So this is pulling out all sorts of different information. You'll see it's binning the data, looking at the number of fire calls that there have been, and we'll have all the statistics on the back. So that's how you can run a model. It will also tell you, just going back to the question you asked, how quickly your data is refreshed. We do give that information on the back of the cards as well as the statistics. So you can see immediately that will tell you how quickly that data set's been refreshed. So you always have that check as to how live your data actually is. So that's how easy it is to rerun your analysis. Of course, sharing out your data. If you want to share that data and you want to change anything, you'll see that you have complete control down here on how you change the colors, how you visualize everything. The same goes for on any of the cards. I can change, I have complete control over that. And then we can share that page back out, much as you say, the same as you're doing sharing the model, you share that page, and then you have the ability to choose who you want to share that to. And they also have all of that interactivity that you've seen, so they can start to explore that data. But what they can't do is access the data in the data pane or get access to the action button to run live analysis in the same way as the analyst actually can. So that's everything I have to show you in that way. I'm just going to quickly bring back the slides. So the last thing I actually wanted to show you was, you'll see how I had a number of different charts that I could actually create. Here I've actually made a sort of a lookup cheat sheet that show you what each of those different visualizations help you to analyze. So there are different patterns you can pull out, different value that each of them will have. And this is actually freely available on our website as well. And I'm sure we can share it out for anyone who would like it. It just allows you to quickly look up what would be the value of using each of those different card types. So that's everything I had to show you in terms of insights. I'm going to hand it back to Brinton now, who I think is going to open up the floor to any questions.
Thanks, Linda. I appreciate it. Great presentation. We do have a bunch of questions, so I'm going to try to kind of group some of them because they have a commonality in what the attendees have asked. But one question that actually we talked about, Linda, prior to this was a little bit around the data and kind of what are the options for getting data into insights and what are the best practices for connecting to either live, a live production system or making a copy of that production environment. So I don't know if you can, maybe you talked a little bit about this, but if you kind of add some more commentary on that about, the type of data and the option of getting into insights.
Yeah, so if you want to connect directly into data in a database, we support both sort of transactional data or using an ETL process into a different data store, so you're not connected into your original data. So we absolutely support everything. You connect into your data using a JDBC driver. You just add in the JDBC driver, set up your connections, and as I say, we then support whatever pattern you want to follow. I mean, generally, we would suggest that you avoid working directly with the original transactional data, but absolutely we support it. So it's whatever works best for your practice. You can just connect into that data.
Great, and I think you've kind of covered this next question, but I just want to revisit that. The question is how do you determine if your data can be viewed or used in real time with insights? And I think you said Excel spreadsheet is not the a best option of doing that, but any additional thoughts around that?
Yeah, so in terms of working with live data, absolutely the best option is working with data directly from a database, so that therefore you have that live connection. The one thing to remember is all your downstream analysis is connected to your original data. So refreshing that data set or even interacting with it will affect all of the downstream analysis. So we can keep that live. If you share out your data, so I didn't talk about the sharing part. If you share that out and you enable the cross-filtering, if you remember, I enable people to interact live with that data, we're also still going to be connected back to that data set. So when you have cross-filtering on, so they will also be interacting and therefore seeing the latest updates of that data, as long as they're using feature layers or they're using the databases. So the Excel is the one time when we can't unfortunately keep that live because we've copied that data over. But we've heard very few cases where this hasn't worked for people, so it's being used, and you can use that update feature throughout.
Great, thanks. I think I at least have one more, maybe a couple of questions. A couple of questions that we received. We will follow up with individuals because they were a little bit more detailed and give Linda some time to dig into them. But the one, if you were able to go back to the time series chart, Linda,
yeah.
The question is exactly what does the dashed line at the end represent?
Ah, yes. Okay, so this dashed line here you were talking about.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, so because we're interpolating between different points in time, so there's always going to be an element of interpolation unless we have a recording every millisecond of the day, and even then you're still interpolating between a millisecond. So between each of those data points we have to do some kind of interpolation. Where there is a very large gap between data points, we make it a dashed line. So that's signifying that there is some uncertainty associated with what you're seeing on that chart. So in that case, we know it's the last data point. I suspect there's a gap there. So we're showing that as a dotted line, just so that you as the analyst, when you're looking at this, you're not making too much inference for where there is potentially lacking information in that chart. So sometimes you'll see those dotted lines within the middle if there's a break within the data that's been collected. So it just allows you to understand exactly what's occurring with that data. That's a good question.
Perfect. All right, thank you. So I guess the last question I'll provide here, and I probably have some response to this as well, but Linda, I thought maybe best for you just to kind of give your thoughts on this. And we have some new users to ArcGIS on this webinar today, which is great, and thank you for those individuals who are joining and might be new to our technology. But the question is, how do they get started with insights? They're saying this is great, but what's the best way to start?
Okay, so the best way to start, if you don't already have it, is download a trial. So that's free. You can get started with that. We do have a number of learn exercises. So if you go to learnarcgis.com, you'll see that there are 2 exercises up there already that you can work your way through. So that will give you sort of access to getting going. We do have a number of videos available. Unfortunately, some of them are me, so if you don't enjoy my voice, you're stuck with it. But there are some videos there. There's a very recent video that we made on regression analysis and on link analysis. We do have some documentation, obviously, so you can read through that. And if anybody has any feedback or anything, they're very welcome to reach out to us. We do really want to hear from people using it and understand some of the pain points or even how we can improve what we're doing.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Linda. Thanks for your time, the presentation, and responding to these questions. And again, there's some questions that
before you.
Go ahead, Mike.
I'm sorry, Britt. Before you go on, I've actually had a couple of questions texted to me on my phone. So let me just. I thought one in particular was really intriguing. Linda, we have PSAP commanders out there who dispatch for large numbers of agencies, police, fire, EMS, but then individually they may have, a dozen different cities, each providing that, plus the county sheriff. The question is, can some of these dashboards be created that can then be shared out individually to each individual customer that the PSAP would have, so that the police chief or the fire chief have something showing these same metrics that they can then interrogate and explore.
Yes, so you have control over who you can share, who you choose to share things out to. So if you want to share out the results, you can set up perhaps groups or something like that. So it would be the own individual sort of police chief, whoever it is you want to put in each of those groups, and you would simply share to that group, and then they would be the only people who have access to see it. So you have absolute control over what you share out and who you share it out to.
So one fire department could then feel comfortable that their data isn't exposed to another fire department that might use it as a comparison of how well or poorly they're doing. Okay,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep.
I think that answers really both of them. Thank you.
All right, well, great. Again, thank you, Linda, for your time and your support on this. And so kind of to extend on that, one of the last questions around how do I get, started with Insight. And Linda, your comments and were great on that. And so as part of a follow-up on this webinar, we will be sending some information, some links. But one of the things for those who may be new to Esri technology or new to Insights, that free trial is a great way to get started with some of the other resources we have posted to help you, whether videos and stuff. So, but the other thing I want to point out is that some of the people on this call may have an enterprise agreement with Esri, and an enterprise agreement would include the Insight product. So you may actually have the Insights and not even be aware of it. So I strongly encourage you to work with your account rep and dig into what you actually have when it comes to entitlements for Insights. And if you don't know who that person is, please reach out to Mike King or myself, Britt Bromley, and that's bbromley@esri.com, and we'll be happy to get you connected to your account rep. So next page, if you don't mind, Linda. So again, thank you everybody for the good questions on this webinar today. For those we didn't respond to, we will get back to you with additional information. So for the remainder of 2018, I know we still have the year coming up here, but we do have some more webinars coming up. We're working on those subjects, the titles and the presenters, but we'll definitely be sending out emails on those, so please look out for those. And we also will be involved with some upcoming FirstNet hackathons that Mike mentioned that he's driving our efforts with FirstNet with Esri. And then if anybody happens to be attending the APCO conference in Las Vegas or the IACP conference in Orlando, please stop by the booth, the Esri booth. We will be there and we'd love to meet with you. We can show and tell insights there if you want to spend some time there or anything else that you might want to discuss. But please drop by and pay a visit to us. In closing, this webinar will be posted on the Esri website in the upcoming week or weeks. And that said, I'd like to thank everyone for joining the webinar today and have a great day.